mean, there's no curiosity on the other side about what's happening inside the deep state. And that's really my question. Who is running the deep state? I've got example after example in agency after agency, very, very legitimate oversight requests. I subpoena documents. You don't get squat. Now, I asked for your testimony last night, and I realized, and I really appreciate the fact that the committee staff and Chairman Paul is very, very concerned about retaliation against you. Apparently, they didn't clear your testimony here at the CIA. Is that true?
No.
So you're appearing as a true whistleblower, publicly right off the bat. I'll do, and I'm sure Senator Paul and the staff will do everything we can to prevent retaliation. What is your game plan after this? You're done with the in DNI and the DIG organization. Do you plan on going back to CIA?
I returned to CIA on, was it April? I'm back at CIA. I just took a couple weeks vacation after it was a long year and I was tired, so I took some time off.
So were you welcome back?
I just arrived and I've got a desk and they're talking to me about what comes next.
I mean, do you have any concerns about me keeping this? Because originally we said you can't keep this after the hearing, but it sounds like now I can keep it. I mean, do you have a concern? Because again, I don't want to harm you in terms of what you've written here. I haven't had a chance to go through it yet.
You can keep it.
Okay. Should we distribute this publicly?
Please hold on that.
For the time being, I will. John Radcliffe was very helpful when he was in that position at DNI. Now he's director of the CIA. What is preventing the CIA from totally cooperating with the DNI?
I don't know.
What would you say? You've been in the CIA. Who's running this show?
Here's what I'll say. We had requests. We have a formal process that we sent those requests over, and I detailed in the transcribed interview the dates and what those requests were for. It appeared to be bureaucratic slow rolling until the government shutdown happened.
Well, that is the technique they use.
Yes.
I mean, they look at every administration or every director of CIA, and if they don't agree with them, this too shall pass, right? They just wait them out. I mean, that's happening right now in both of our investigations. So, again, I'm calling for a church-like commission. We'll call it the Paul Johnson Commission, okay? We need to figure out who runs the deep state. But in my final 3 minutes, because I held what I thought was a blockbuster hearing 2 weeks ago.
It was very good.
And this is on my investigation in terms of the harms done by the COVID injection. And I'm going to talk about it right now because it's not being covered by the legacy media. Alternate media, yes. Fox News, Fox Business has had me on. I went on, supposed to be on CNN last week. And I sent them my report and told them that's what I want to talk about. They canceled the appearance. Oh, that's not why. Sure it is. So this is what, and I can do this in 2 minutes and 20 seconds. This is what we uncovered. This is what is being covered up by now the legacy media. On March 1st of 2021, Dr. Peter Marks, head of CBER, the organization within FDA that approves vaccines and also is supposed to surveil those vaccines post-market for safety, was given a multi-page briefing by the main data mining analyst within FDA working with the inventor of the algorithm they used to analyze the VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. That briefing told Dr. Marks that the current algorithm, because of the nature of the massive number of claims coming into VAERS, by the way, from 1990 until 2020, on average, about 280 deaths are reported in VAERS associated with the vaccine. 2021 is over 21,000. Nothing to see here. But anyway, so they're using an algorithm. They were warned that this algorithm, because the Moderna and Pfizer are so close together, the way they're analyzing is going to mask and hide safety signals. That's March 1st, 2021. 26 days later, a new state-of-the-art algorithm, developed by the inventor of the original algorithm, was presented to senior FDA officials, showing 49 cases of extreme masking, 25 safety signals, including sudden cardiac death, pulmonary infarction, Bell's palsy, different types of strokes. Month after month after month, they continue to do this data mining. They continue to show additional safety signals. Did Peter Marks, did Anthony Fauci, did President Biden go to the American public and say, hang on here, we've got some data, we've got some concerns? No. They blame the unvaccinated for continuing the pandemic. This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. We need to mandate this. This is what government does. This is what the deep state does. I can't explain it all. My investigation now, because I finally got documents. This would never have happened if we didn't have documents. And by the way, just like we found that David Morin's email that now has resulted in prosecution, where he has a FOIA lead, showed him how to make emails disappear. If you send me something sensitive to my Gmail, we have the same types of evidence in our report. We need to get to the bottom of this. And right now, I'm just using this moment. I need the mainstream media, CBS, ABC, CNN, to step forward and start covering what is a major scandal. How many thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of people are permanently disabled or possibly lost their life because our FDA hid the fact that there were safety signals screaming at them with the COVID injection. So again, you can't answer all my questions in terms of but we need to figure out who is running this deep state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Johnson, I completely concur with the call for a church committee, but I'll tell you how difficult it is. Church committee was like 1975, 50 some odd years ago. I've been trying to get the classified version of the church committee for over 2 years, but I've been blocked by the Intel committee, including someone from our own party is blocking having me. They've shown me a room with 400 boxes, and I can go look in all the boxes to see if I can find it. My staff's not allowed to go in the room, but they will not reveal to me something that's 50 years old that should be declassified for the public, much less for me.
Maybe we should go together. It probably only takes about 4 or 5 years to dig through all the boxes.
That's right. Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Erdman, thank you for being here. In March of 2023, the Senate unanimously passed legislation requiring the Office of the Director of National Intelligence to declassify all, I believe the exact language is, declassify any and all information related to potential links between the Wuhan Institute of Virology and the origins of COVID-19. I have some familiarity with this legislation because I wrote it. It passed the House unanimously. President Biden signed it into law under, I think, popular duress. As you may remember, well, first of all, are you familiar with this law?
Oh, of course, yes.
As you may recall, it set a statutory deadline of just a couple of months later, which the Biden administration promptly ignored and blew through. When they finally did release the report, I think we've got a picture of it here that'll appear over my shoulder. It was all of 5 pages. Yeah. Here it is. Wait for it. 5 pages. Remember, the law says any and all information. 5 pages, heavily redacted, even the 5 pages. I think one of those pages is like a cover note or something. Yeah, here it is. The executive summary. 5 pages. This is, according to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, this is any and all information related to COVID-19 and the Wuhan Virology Lab. Now, you've been on this task force that has reviewed these documents. Is this all the information the United States government had?
That is not all the information. And I'll tell you a little story about that if you'd like.
Please.
A story about your 5 pages there. So there was a classified report being written at the time all of this was going on. And I assumed as I'm reading through the documents that they would just take that classified report, which didn't look like that, and they would just redact it. And because I'm reading through the documents, but that is not what happened. They decided to write a different paper instead of what was already.
Who do you say they? Who's they?
The National Intelligence Council.
The National Intelligence Council was at the time that the law passed was doing a thorough review, or doing a review. We don't know how thorough. How many pages? You've been on this task force. You've gotten a sense of, if it's not 5 pages, how many pages worth of information would you guess the United States government was in possession of related to Wuhan lab and COVID possible links?
I can tell you that Director Gabbard is working through, I believe, 2,000 pages.
2,000?
They're trying to get released in the first batch. This is the law states yes, any and all, but there's still the requirement to run it through the different agencies to ensure that there's not some sources and methods. But there's like 2,000 pages.
2,000 pages. 2,000 pages. I want to show you what Admiral Haynes, Director Haynes, said to me when I wrote to her, Senator Braun and I wrote to her following this outrageous, ridiculous report. She wrote back to me and said, well, we declassified only what we could without endangering sources and methods. Only what we could. 5 pages of summary that itself has redactions. The 5 pages have redactions. And you're telling me there are literally thousands of documents. Why are they hiding all of this material?
I can tell you that the interagency process of declassification is highly bureaucratic, and that is being worked. And I think you saw just a few days ago, Director Gabbard released some information about the lab.
Was Director Haynes, Admiral Haynes, was she involved in making the decision not to release the material?
I don't have any proof that she was involved in the direct decision. I have no emails saying that directly, but
it was her office, and it's her signature on the letter to me. It's her office that sent the 5 pages. She's the one who said, this is what we have. This is all we have. You're telling me there were 2,000 plus documents.
No,
They sent us 5.
The first swath of documents that we're looking to, there's many more than that.
I got you. Many more. Let me tell you what this so-called 5-page report, what it said in its substance, to the extent there was any. They said, number one, that nothing that was researched at the Wuhan lab could plausibly be a progenitor of SARS-CoV-2. Number two, they said there is no evidence of any research-related incident involving Wuhan employees that might have been related to the pandemic. Now, in your experience, given what you have seen, are those true statements?
Some of that would have to be covered and classified, but no, they're not true. If we wanted to get into details, I don't believe that's true.
So the United States government first deliberately violated a law passed by Congress, signed by the president, that ordered them to release all information related to the Wuhan lab, number one. Number two, they then violated the law again by withholding thousands and thousands of pages that they had at the time and knew were covered by the law. Number three, the conclusions, so-called, they released to the public are false. If that is not a cover-up, I don't know what is. And if our elected officials and unelected officials, in this case, in the IC and ODNI, if they can get by with blatantly violating the statutes of this country and lying to the American people, I'm sorry, but we don't have a democracy anymore. I don't know what it is, but it's not a democracy because we, the people, aren't in charge. These people are in charge, and they're lying to us every single day. You said in your opening statement that Dr. Fauci, speaking of someone who's not exactly a truth teller, that Dr. Fauci intervened to put his thumb on the scale of what information the intelligence community, the IC, could review when they did their initial assessments of whether or not the Wuhan lab was linked to COVID. What exactly did he do?
So let me clarify that. So he reached in and he provided this list of scientists and subject matter experts that we should talk to. And it's not like he's saying, you will go talk to them. He doesn't have the power to do that technically. It's just that the bureaucracy in place at the time was perfectly happy to pursue those recommendations, even when there was a number of individuals who expressed concern, saying, at least one for sure, that said, are you sure we want to do this? He's a policymaker, and we need to have our intelligence cycle.
And he had a point of view, did he not?
He certainly did. And here's,
And what was that point of view? Just refresh our memories.
he believes it's natural origin. He still does.
Of course. I mean, he said this over and over. Now, he would have reason to, given that he supported gain-of-function research to the Wuhan lab, lied about it to Congress, lied about it repeatedly to the chairman, as I recall. So his hands are dirty in this. And yet here he is intervening behind the scenes. It's bad enough that he's out there misleading the public. Behind the scenes, he's trying to intervene to stop our own intelligence community, who are supposed to work for the public, from actually accurately assessing the evidence. This is unbelievable. This is unbelievable. And then people wonder, gee, why are the American people not trusting of elected officials? I wonder, why are they? I'll tell you why, because we are repeatedly lied to by these people. Lied to and lied to and lied to. I want to thank you, Mr. Erdman, for your testimony. I just want to note, I think we've only scratched the surface here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this hearing. And I just want to point out, we've got a witness who's saying under oath that the report that the government issued lied to the American people, that it is false. We've got a big problem in this country. We've got a big, big problem, and we haven't begun to solve it yet. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Moody.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is one of the most important hearings we will hold during this administration. I think when the country went mad, and I don't care if you consider yourself a blue state or a red state, the country went mad, and people were craving leadership, and leadership that truly was based on science, not someone that alleged they were following science and seemed to care more about controlling the public. I think this is one of the most important hearings, and I think everyone that actually showed up today, and you see who is here involved and taking part in this hearing, are the ones that want, on behalf of the American people, who are, by the way, are supposed to be in charge of the United States of America, want to get to the bottom of what happened, and not just because that's right, so that the people that are in charge of this nation understood what happened, but so that this never happens again. And if we are trying to prevent a government that is trying to control a populace based on nothing, based on no justification, and making sure that that never happens again, I just want it to be very clear to everyone in this room, or anyone who has taken the time to watch, that cares about their country and understands what it means to protect freedom. I just want them to see who showed up today, and who is participating, and who has thanked you for coming out bravely and disclosing these facts, what happened, and your opinion based on your years, decades of experience. I, for one, hailing from the great free state of Florida. You know, Florida used to be known for flamingos. We're now known for freedom. That is because what took place over the last administration, and when churches were closed, when businesses were closed, when schools were closed, when people were shut up in their apartments, when families were prohibited from socializing and gathering, many were kept from their loved ones when they died, all under this guidance of government leading based on science. We really have to go back and question that, because that cannot happen in this country. And I think many of us that were in charge at the time question how we ever allowed that to happen. And certainly in Florida, I am so proud, along with Governor DeSantis, we led against that tide in many respects. And when people were still being told to stay at home, don't let your kids go to school, don't go to church, all of these things that seem insane right now, we didn't. We stood up for the truth. We tried our best to discern what was true, what was not, what didn't make sense. And let me tell you why things didn't make sense. And first of all, you had your Secretary of HHS, which was basically invisible, checked out. Those are words of the Biden administration at the time. Officials from the Biden administration said Secretary Becerra was invisible, checked out, an unfortunate choice for the role. And then you had Dr. Fauci, who came out and contradicted himself constantly. At one point, he even admitted later, he told people shouldn't be walking around with masks on. And later he said that was because we were trying to control the supply for healthcare professionals. It wasn't based on any science. But then later he told everyone to wear masks repeatedly. The 6-foot rule seemed to have been just crafted out of thin air with no basis in science whatsoever. In fact, he said that rule sort of just appeared when he testified. And that guidance on the shutdown of schools and small businesses was arbitrary and not based on any science. So I just want to make sure the American people hear that. You had a government who's supposed to be limited and stay out of people's lives, coming in and offering guidance. Many times it was done under mandates to close businesses, people's livelihoods, to keep children from being educated, to keep people from expressing their faith and gathering to show freedom of religion and their faith and expression. I mean, unbelievable what happened during the COVID years. I was so proud of my state, along with Governor DeSantis. We launched a grand jury investigation because the federal government sure wasn't doing it. And we got to the bottom of some of this, what was being said publicly by those that we had trusted in these positions, and how that was not actually the truth and the science. That was where the name, the Free State of Florida, has come from. And I'm so glad now to be here as one of the newest United States senators, bringing that experience, that grand jury investigation, everything that we did differently in Florida and stood up to the madness. Because that is how the people remain in charge of their government. in the grand jury investigation that we did, we followed the evidence. We found that many of those policies, including masking, lockdown mandates, they lack sufficient scientific basis, and they in fact caused significant harm to Floridians. The same grand jury found a pattern. I'm quoting the grand jury here. This is a nonpartisan group acquired from the community to judge facts, a pattern of deceptive and obfuscatory behavior from both Big Pharma and the federal agencies charged with regulating them with respect to the COVID vaccines. So it appears from everything that we found from our own investigation, an unbiased, totally separate review of what was being said publicly by the federal government compared to what was actually based in science, it found that most of what was said and the events surrounding it was a public health establishment that was fixated on controlling the public and forcing narratives rather than protecting public health or discovering the truth. And so I am grateful that you were willing to be here today. I know that this is under subpoena, but certainly it takes courage and to be here and to be a whistleblower that can get accountability for the American people. You know, Florida was years ahead of the federal government's supposed experts. We're proud of that, but this is so important. And so I want to know, and I have one question. We're getting to the what. What happened? We were glad that Florida led on that. Even while people remained locked down, we were trying to get to the answers. What happened? But in all of your reviews and what you've been able to compile and what you're saying today, what is the why? Why?
Why did the cover-up happen? I think there's a lot of incentives, misaligned incentives that have been created because of this highly opaque and complex system of laboratories, life science research. And the IC is just one component of that. Why did it happen inside the CIA and inside DNI and inside the interagency space when they were doing the analysis over the course of 4 years? Part of it is iron rice bowls, you know, your normal bureaucratic issues where one agency has this, another agency has that. There was groupthink. You could see it happening in real time as you read from beginning to end. I'll give you a couple examples. Every time there was an open source publication that came out, they're very good at grabbing that and kicking it up for the contracted scientists, you know, the BSEG, to take a look at and assess. And the goal, it seemed, it always leaned one direction. They never took the publications from Sorensen and Dalgleish, who came out very early. I think it was July 2020 that one of the best papers written was open source by Sorensen and Dalgleish. They never took those papers and said, wow, we've got a lot here, we need to make sure we get this added in. Or Dr. Stephen Quay, for example, who had a lot to say about COVID origins. It was always one direction, and because the interagency space seemed intent on pushing it that way, and why the interagency space? I think the interagency space, I'm talking about the National Intelligence Council and the people responsible for that. I mean, these are people who have relationships with the National Academy of Scientists and the National Academy of Sciences. They've got relationships with the WMD community, and they're all part of the same, I don't know, ecosystem. The planets are all revolving around the same star. And so you get groupthink. There's a multitude of reasons. I didn't find any smoking gun where they said, well, we got to cover this up because for sure the US government paid for research in Wuhan, China. But they were certainly well aware of PREDICT. They were well aware of the diffuse proposal that had circulated. They had those products available to them. I think you get enough people shouting something down, it gets shouted down. And that happened repeatedly. I do want to just, if I can take just a moment, particularly about the scientists that are brought forward. I really want to emphasize a couple things, and one of it is we can't vilify these scientists. I'm going to give a very short anecdote, and I hope I'm not going over on time or anything like that. But when I got hired to the CIA, I can't tell you how proud I was. I really couldn't believe that they hired me. I'm sure there's some friends who are like, yeah, I can't believe it either. But they hired me because they saw potential to be able to be somebody who could recruit spies and steal secrets. That's my job. Imagine you're a scientist. Imagine the US government comes to you and says, listen, sir, you are a specialist in a field no one else knows about. And in fact, the whole point of a PhD is to push beyond what's known further than anybody else in a very rarefied field. Imagine you're a scientist and the CIA comes up to you and says, or the NIC, the intelligence community, comes up to you and says, you're special. Not because we see potential, but because we know you're special and we need your help. We can't vilify these people who wanted to help. We can, however, boy, I might be contradicting myself here, but the system definitely needs a look because the system has been put in place now and you've got these same people that we've said, you're important to the IC. We just haven't done the proper work to ensure that those people who are important to the IC aren't cross-pollinated all over in other places so that they can incentivize the kind of research that we need done or the white papers we need written. We have to have a holistic overview. And I think it's really hard to have like one agency do their review, another agency do their review, the legislative branch do their review. You know, in this case, it is a team sport.
So one answer also, Senator Moody, to your question about the why, people think, well, gosh, was there a conspiracy where all these evil people had their hands together and they were conspiring to do something bad? And I think George Carlin put it the best. He said it isn't required that you come up with a conspiracy where interests converge. And I think the interest is we funded a lot of dangerous research. Accidents have happened. This was an accident. In all likelihood, this was an accident. Even the Chinese probably didn't want this to happen in Wuhan. It was an accident. But the interest is that if you funded that research for 10 years, wouldn't I logically want to ask you why, why you did this funding. And so there are dozens of people throughout government who did cover this up, maybe hundreds, but they don't even know each other necessarily, but they had a hand in funding this research through the years. They've been in favor of it. It's been a big debate. For 20 some odd years, there's been a huge debate, maybe longer. People think this is the first virus that got out. One of the most, it's not as much reported, but one of the most famous viruses that got out was the Russian flu of 1977. And we're not sure it came from Russia or where it came from, but the interesting thing is nobody over 24 got the flu. Zero, not one person. Why? Because the Russian flu of 1977 had the exact same RNA structure as a flu in 1953 that had been kept in a lab somewhere. How do you get an identical virus 30 years later? Viruses mutate every couple of months like COVID has. There is no way to have an identical virus unless you got it from a lab. So proof positive that the 1977 flu actually came out of a lab. An accident, once again, an accident. There's a woman who's written about this. I think her last name is Young. She says that over a period of years, like 1,500 major accidents that she's cataloged. So it's not only about malfeasance, it's about safety of these labs. In fact, some people were finally convinced that this came from Wuhan because it was a BSL-2 instead of a BSL-4 for much of the time, that it didn't have enough safety precautions. But even the safest one, the 4, still has accidents. So maybe some of these experiments, we ought to reconsider whether we do them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it just goes to show why it's helpful to have a doctor as our chairman. You could also be a witness.
Thank you. We're going to conclude pretty quickly. I'm going to give Senator Johnson another chance if you have another question.
I've got a quick question, then I want to go someplace else. In September 2023, we apparently had a CIA whistleblower come forward, and there are news articles written about this, that 6 of the 7 analysts to describe this were bribed to change their analysis. Is that true?
No. So there's some clarifications on that. What is true, and I thank you for bringing up this question, Senator Johnson, because this is one of the things I wanted to make sure the record was corrected. So, and if I have just a few minutes here to sort of talk through this, there was new information that came out in 2022, and it forced the community to try and conduct a relook. There were 10 CIA scientists, I'm talking from the CIA side now, not on the NICS side, 10 CIA scientists that were said, why don't you go ahead and do a COVID relook? On that team, there were 7 SMEs, subject matter experts, technical experts with lab experience, medical experience. And so they began their relook. And by the time they wrote their paper, they wrote a paper and they said, we're assessing this as a lab leak. 8 of the 10, according to multiple whistleblowers, 8 of the 10 were definitely leaning in on lab leak. They sent that paper, that draft paper, up to the Weapons and Counterproliferation Center front office and said, take a look. And magically, a new report shows up that allegedly contradicted the information that had come in earlier that year. The multiple people we spoke to said, yeah, it didn't really contradict it. But they were told, go back to the drawing board and do a reassessment. So the interagency got involved. They were having discussions. So they go back to the drawing board. And by the time 2023 rolls around, they've got their answer. They say, 6 of the 7 technical people on that team. So there's 10 people on the team. 6 of the 7 technical experts say, yep, we still think it's a lab leak. We still think it's a lab leak. And they were sticking to their guns. Management changed the analytic line. They changed the conclusion to a non-consensus call. Actually, worse than that, they said that the exact words were, I don't want to get this wrong. Excuse me. We may never precisely know the origin of SARS-CoV-2. Precisely. Precisely is not a term analysts use. They use like low confidence, medium confidence, yes, no. Precisely is a word you use when you want to deliberately end discussion. Because do you know how many resources we need to precisely know the origin of SARS-CoV-2?
So again, I want the chairman to indulge me a little bit more here. There's no bribes paid. This was just a management decision. They overrode what the, okay.
But the financial piece definitely needs to be looked into because they did receive an EPA. They got it. It's $1,500.
Okay, so it may be true then.
No. Let me be very clear. There were no bribes. They received an exceptional performance award. They were upset with it, and it was not a bribe. But what I will say,
okay,
the people who
they were rewarded for
their work. They didn't know they were going to get it.
Okay,
they were not.
I got you. Okay, I got you. And I understand this distinction. One point and one question. Just received this from Liz Lyon, the CIA Director of Public Affairs. The committee acted in bad faith by subpoenaing an agency officer for testimony today without notifying CIA. Despite having already obtained closed-door testimony from the individual previously, the witness testifying today is not appearing as a whistleblower in pursuit of the truth, but instead in response to the subpoena issued by Chairman Paul. This proceeding amounts to nothing more than a dishonest political theater masquerading as a congressional hearing, as the CIA has already assessed COVID-19 most likely originated from the lab leak, and efforts to undermine that conclusion are disingenuous. I'm calling on CIA Director Radcliffe and this person to apologize to Chairman Paul and this committee, this is not political theater. I have years and years and years of built-up frustration of agencies like the CIA, Department of Justice, the FBI, HHS, snubbing our oversight, giving us the big middle finger. And that really leads me to my question. You talked about how proud you were. Okay, I can imagine that. My belief is I'd say most people serving in government, all these agencies, are doing good work. They're patriots. Why aren't there more people like you? I mean, you saw Josh Hawley's, Senator Hawley's, the 5-page snub, the 5-page middle finger saying, any and all, this is it. And people inside the agencies know that's not the truth. They know that is a big, fat lie. What happens inside the agency that people, good Americans, patriotic Americans, people who believe in democracy, witness that and realize the agency they're working for is lying bold-faced to legitimate congressional oversight, legitimate congressional investigations to the American people? What is causing this?
Two answers. One, we need more leaders like Director Gabbard, who pulls together a task force of people to actually pursue this, despite the difficulty in wrangling agencies to do the right thing. I think the second thing I'll say is it's a minority of officers. I mean, most of the people joining the CIA are barrel-chested freedom fighters. Like, they're out there wanting to do the right thing. As you matriculate upwards into the bureaucracy, I just think that it gets easier and easier to find people who are more willing to get along. And you know, if we want to link this back to COVID, you had a bunch of refuseniks out there that said no, and they were trying to push these people out. And what you really need in these organizations, like, you can't have the whole organization saying no to everything because nothing gets done. But you got to retain the people who are sometimes a little more difficult to deal with, more willing to say no over and over. And I think we've created a milquetoast bureaucracy. When I first joined the agency, the chiefs of offices had a lot of power, and then modernization happened, and they watered everything down, and the accountability piece has to be there. Otherwise, this is just going to keep happening.
Well, again, I appreciate you coming forward. Again, I'm calling on Director Radcliffe and that communications person. This committee, this chairman needs an apology. This is not political theater. This is serious oversight work. This is what the American people need to see. And I just wish our Democrat colleagues had any level of curiosity what's happening inside the deep state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and I completely concur, and I would also like to respond to the CIA spokesman. They say that we have already obtained closed-door testimony. Well, closed-door testimony doesn't provide oversight. Public testimony provides oversight. We have asked them for public testimony and for oversight. We would love to have the 6 or 7 scientists that were commissioned to look at this, we'd love to see their report. Why would we not be allowed to see their report? I can't even read that in private. But that should be public, the science. If there are sources and methods, mark them out, redact them. But we should be able to see that. But for them to have the gall to say, oh, we allowed the witness to testify in private and that should be enough. No, you were told by Congress unanimously to declassify this material, and you sent us 5 pages. Imagine how many, you mentioned maybe 2,000 pages. DOE has a report. That's got to be 40 or 50 pages, but the base documents for DOE's report are probably run into the hundreds of pages just for that one report. And they did a great analysis of this, but still most of that is not available to the public. Why does it need to be available? Because this is going to happen again, and we need to be prepared, and we need to talk about it. One of the other things we didn't get to in this hearing, but we need to talk to, how do you prepare for the next pandemic? Well, one of the things that actually worked was monoclonal antibodies. We need to be talking about how we can quickly produce them again, how we can quickly get started on things like that. What worked and what didn't work? Masks didn't work. 6 feet of distancing, there was no science. They say follow the science, and yet it looks like everything that happened at the CIA was the politicians overruling the scientists. The scientists were concluding this came from a lab leak, in all probability. The politicians were overturning them once at 2 in the morning. So that is one of the takeaways from this, is that, yes, follow the science and the scientists, and that the scientists need to not have a conflict of interest. Which leads me to the final point I'll make before we conclude. I applaud the Trump administration for an executive order saying no more gain of function. It is head and shoulders above anything. The Biden administration really didn't do much of anything on this. The Trump administration is trying to live by that. The reason it won't work forever is that people who have a Weasley way with words, let's say Anthony Fauci, will come back into play, and half of his lieutenants probably still work over there. One of them will get in power again, and all they will simply say is, oh, creating that new virus that grows 10 times faster and grows better in human cells, oh, that's not gain of function. Because that's what Anthony Fauci was doing. He was still doing the gain of function research. He was just saying, oh, the way I look at the definition, that's not really. So we do need a commission. And what I proposed is the Risky Research Review Act. It'll be a presidential commission. It'll have scientists on it. They will be experts, but they will not be currently in the employ of government competing for grants. I think that is a conflict of interest. they have to be people outside of it. There also will be some people who are national security experts as well. And we have to look at the list of things. One scientist, Dr. Esfeld, ordered off the internet under Biden's policy. He ordered snippets of DNA from here and here, chopped them up, put them together, and he made the Spanish flu. Now, he told the FBI he was doing it because he wanted to prove a point. He didn't create the infectious portion of the Spanish flu, but he said, look, I can do it by just ordering DNA. So there are a lot of things that have to be addressed, and unfortunately, it's somehow a partisan issue, and we're not getting anywhere. But I want to applaud you for your courage in coming forward. You did come forward at the response of a subpoena. That is a lawful subpoena, and I see no reason that anyone should try to punish you. If anybody does try to punish you, I can promise you that we will defend you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator
Meeting's
Paul.
adjourned. Thank you. Yep. I would like to thank our witness for joining us here today to share his testimony and expertise with the committee. The record for this hearing will remain open until 5 p.m. on Wednesday, May 13th, 2026 for the submission of statements and questions. For the record, the hearing is now adjourned. Thank you.